Dear students, let us continue the discussion of first chapter of operating systems, the part of module 1, and this is my third lecture. Today we'll start the discussion with the protection and security. We know that the protection and security, so these two terms are very important if you consider any system. So here we have to consider this with respect to the operating system now. Already I think you are aware of what is protection and what is security. Okay, so see here it is given like the protection means it's any mechanism for controlling access of processes or users to resources defined by the operating system. Because in the operating system we know that we'll be having the number of processes and we'll be having the number of resources, and here the processes will be accessing the resources. So here the protection means by this protection we will be having a mechanism to control the access of resources by the processes. So here, as I told you, whatever the resources that the computer system is having, so we know that all the resources will be shared among the different users as well as the different processes. So when these resources are shared among the different users and the processes, so you should have a particular means by which you control the access of these particular resources. So for this, whatever the mechanism here, so that itself is called as a protection. So after this protection, the next term is security. So what is the security then? So the security is nothing but a defense mechanism against the internal and external attacks. So that's what the protection is for the internal things, and the security is for the usually for the external attacks. So what type of attacks may be possible? So attack means again we have the wide variety of attacks, like we have the denial of service attack. So what is denial of service means? Here if a particular service is running and if the attack happens, so that service will not be available to the user. So that is called as denial of service attack. Similarly, we have worms. So the worms and viruses, so these are going to harm your system. So there is a difference between worms and viruses. So viruses will come in the form of a files, but worms comes in the form of a program. So most of the time whenever you install a particular software, so along with that software some additional softwares will be installed which will be irritating to you. So such a software, the unwanted softwares which are installed automatically on your system are usually called as worms. So after this already you are aware of the viruses. Okay, so these are going to affect the files. Okay, so all these are nothing but the attacks. Along with this we have some types of identity theft. Identity theft means what? So this best example is using the password of some other person. So most of the time you will be using email ID. So in order to access the email, you will be having your ID and password. If that password is known to somebody else, so another he can access your account by knowing your email ID and password. So this is called as identity theft attack. Okay. So similar to this, we have another one, that is theft of service. Means here we know that whatever the services that are running, so most of the time the services will not be available free of cost. So you have to pay for those services and you have to use. But so there may be the possibility that whatever the paid services are there, so these can be used by some other person unauthorized way. Means without paying that particular thing. So all such kinds are called as the attack. So in this again these can be categorized into the internal attacks and the external attacks. So in order to defend your system from these particular attacks, whatever the mechanisms we use, so that is called as a security mechanism. So again generally how the operating system is going to protect your system from the these different attacks and all. So usually the systems first distinguish among the users and to determine who can do what. So that's what here we saw. You should have a means for controlling the access of the processes or the users to the resources. So for that, usually what the systems will do is, so whatever the users we have, so every user will be given with a user ID, so a unique identification number given to each user. So based on this user ID, the access permissions will be given or taken for the corresponding user, because in the previous lecture itself we saw that the operating system itself work on the two modes, that is dual mode operation is there, that is we have the normal user mode and the kernel mode. So whatever the high level system specific activities are there, so these will be available only in the kernel mode, and these are not available for the normal user mode, because there is a possibility that the user maybe knowingly or unknowingly they may change some contents, so that it may lead to the denial of that particular service, or sometimes the system itself may get crashed. So that's why this is also again one of the measure of protection. Okay, so in the same way usually the system will be having the user IDs for every user. So based on that user ID, the access permissions will be given and taken off. So along with the user ID then associated with all files processes of that user to determine the access control. So that's what. So along with this user ID, so we have one more concept of group ID. So group ID means what? So this similar kind of users will be grouped into a particular group, and for that group also a unique identification number is given, that is called as group ID. Means here what happens? So some access permissions will be given based on the user, and some access permissions will be given based on the groups. For example, let us consider you have a server running. So let us consider in the company the different type of workers will be there. So some will be working on the web systems, web technology, some will be working on the database technology, some will be working for the backend, and so on. So that's why see, based on the nature of work they are doing, only those access permissions should be given. For example, the people who are working on web technology, so only front-end access should be given. So back-end access should not be given to them. Similarly, the people working on the back-end should be given only the access to those. So they should not be given access to the front-end and all. So that's why the group of people or the users who are working on that technology, so they form a particular group. Okay, and all the user IDs will be the part of that group. So in this case, what your system will do is, whatever the access permissions that should be given to all the users, so the system will give that access permission to that entire group itself. So when the permission is given to the group, so automatically the members of that group will get that particular permission. So in this way, by using these user IDs and group IDs, so the operating system can manage the access permissions or access rights to the users. So along with this, here we have one more concept, that is privilege escalation. So this privilege escalation allows user to change to effective ID with more rights. Means here what happens, along with this user ID and group ID, so the system is having one more type of ID. It is called as effective ID, that is effective user ID and effective group ID. So what is this effective user ID and effective group ID? Because we know that usually the user ID will decide whether a particular user is having the access permission or not. But sometimes your system want to give the temporary access to the corresponding user for the some resources. So for that, to give the temporary access to the specific users, so his effective user ID will be enabled there. So along with the user ID, the user will be having the effective user ID. So by using that effective user ID, he may get the access to the particular resource or a particular activity which is not possible by his normal user ID. So this is called as the privilege escalation. So after this, the next point to be discussed from this chapter is the distributed systems. So already you might be aware of the distributed systems. As the name itself indicates, the distributed system means, so this is an opposite term for the standalone system. The standalone system means what happens, whatever the system you are using, so you will be getting you will be working on all the whatever the activities you will be working, so all the activities will be carried out on that system only which you are using. But this is called as a standalone system. But in distributed systems, what happens, sitting at one place, you will be able to access the resources or the services that are running or available in the machines which are not present with you. So remotely you will be accessing those things. So this will form the distributed system. The system itself will distributed, or the services are distributed among the different devices over the network. So that's what here given. So the collection of separate, possibly heterogeneous systems networked together to provide the users with access to the various resources that the system maintains. So okay, so that's what the collection of the different systems. So possibly heterogeneous means the different kind of systems. So network together to provide users with access to the various resources and the services. So that's what I told you. So the access to a shared resource increases computation speed, functionality, data availability, and reliability. Because see here we know that whatever the systems you use day-to-day life also, so most of the time you will not be making use of the entire capacity of that system. You consider the example of the hard disk only. So nowadays whatever the computer systems you take, so usually the hard disk will be of size 1 TB. But whether you have the data of 1 TB on your system, most of the time no. Most of the time you will not uh, store 500 GB data also. So unnecessarily the system resource is wasted, no. So that's why here through these distributed systems, so whatever the computing capacities are there, so these itself are shared among all the users, so that whatever the resources that are available, so the best use of these resources will be taken care here. Okay, so taken here. So that's why here we say that by using distributed systems, the access to shared resources will increase the computation speed, functionality, data availability, and reliability. Okay, so all these things will be achieved by sharing the resources among the different users through these distributed systems. So the next point is distributed systems depend on networking for their functionality. Very, very important, because here we saw that the systems itself are distributed with across the different locations. So here all the systems will work combinedly all together for a particular activity. But in order to have the communication among these distributed systems, so all should be connected with each other. So in order to have the connectivity with each other, they all should be networked. Okay, so that's why the networking plays a very important role, and the speed of the different operations that can be carried out through this network will also plays a very important role with respect to the throughput and the performance. Okay, so after this, the next one is networks are characterized based on the distances between their nodes. So already you might be aware of these things. So whatever the networks we have, so based on the coverage or the distance, so we have the various kinds of networks, like we have local area network, wide area network, and metropolitan area network. So actually metropolitan area network comes before wide area network. Okay, so what is local area network? As the name itself indicates, local area network, it's a local network which comprises a particular building or an office or a campus. Okay, so in the college also, whatever the network is there, so that is nothing but a LAN only, local area network, where all the devices of the entire college will be interconnected with each other. So this forms a LAN. But what is wide area? Before wide area, we see metropolitan area network. So what is metropolitan area network? So here the coverage is greater than the local area network. So in local area network, we saw that the coverage will be for an office or a building or for a campus. But here metropolitan area network means the network area may be restricted to a particular, it may span for a particular city or the collection of cities and so on. So the best example for this metropolitan area network is your cable network. Okay, so whatever the cable network you have for your televisions at home, so it is an example of the metropolitan area network. Means here you know that all the TVs, today we have the set-top boxes. So the digital receivers will be connected throughout a particular city, and most of the time the network provider will be, the cable provider will be giving access or the cable connection to the nearby villages and the nearby cities also. So this all together will form a particular network. So this is the best example of the metropolitan area network. So above this we have the third variety, that is wide area network. So here we have the interconnected devices throughout the universe, throughout the globe. The best example is internet. Okay, so if you have the internet connection, it is possible to access any device from any corner of the world. Okay, so this is nothing but the wide area network. So after this we'll discuss some special purpose systems. So let us start with the real-time embedded system. So nowadays embedded systems are playing a very important role. A lot of growth is taking place in the field of embedded systems because by the invent of the IoT, so everything is embedded today. Okay. So the embedded computers are the most prevalent form of the computers in existence. So these devices are found everywhere. For example, the car engines, robots, VCRs, and microwave ovens, and so on. So again, as I told you, by the introduction of this IoTs, everywhere we have the embedded systems. Everything is automated now. Okay, so it is possible only through the embedded systems only. So they tend to have very specific tasks. So that's what we know. Embedded system means for a particular task, we'll be having that embedded system. You consider the example of a gas sensor only. So nowadays, whatever the regulators we have, the regulators comes with the gas sensor. So whenever there is a leakage, so some system will be set up there. So if a sensor will be there, when it senses the leak, the catch there, so it may notify the user through a particular buzzer or a message and so on. Okay. So this is for a particular task. So that's what here the embedded system means. This will be for a particular task. Okay. So usually they have little or no user interface, so preferring to spend their time monitoring and managing the hardware devices such as automobile engines and robotic arms. Already we saw an example for this. So the embedded systems almost always run a real-time operating system. It's very important thing. So the operating system, so we have one more variety of operating system. It is a real-time operating system, RTOS, where the time plays a very important role. Okay. So a real-time system is used when rigid time requirements have been placed on the operation of a processor or the flow of data. Thus, it is often used as a control device in a dedicated application. Okay, so that's what here for, especially for the embedded systems. So another variety of operating system is there. It is real-time operating system. In short, it is also called as RTOS. So the real-time operating system, a time plays very important role. Means whenever a particular activity is carried out by the operating system, so it should be completed in a specified time. If it is unable to complete in the specified time, the task will not be of any use. So or it may cause some harmful effects and all. So that's why the RTOS, the most of the embedded systems use this real-time operating system where the time plays a very important role. So the sensors bring data to the computer. The computer must analyze the data and possibly adjust controls to modify the sensor inputs. So real-time system has well-defined fixed time constraints. So processing must be done within the defined constraints or the system will fail. So that's what I told you. The real-time operating system means so whatever the things that are to be done, this should be carried out in a fixed time constraint. Okay, if it is unable to process or if unable to complete in the given time, so in most of the time the system will fail. Okay, so this is about the first special purpose system, that is real-time embedded system. So after this the next special purpose system is the multimedia system. Okay, so nowadays whatever the devices we have, so almost all the devices, all the mobile systems are the multimedia systems. Okay, so already you are aware of what is meant by the multimedia. So a recent trend in technology is the incorporation of this multimedia data into the computer system. So these include multimedia means this includes the audio files such as MP3s, DVD movies, video conferencing and short video clips of movie previews or news stories downloaded over the internet. So nothing to discuss here much here because everybody is aware of these multimedia systems and all. Okay, so multimedia means it is not the normal data. Okay, so the above normal data means above this textual data, we have the data in the form of the audio, video, and so on. Okay, so when you incorporate this audio, video signals or audio, video data into the device, that device becomes the multimedia device or multimedia system. Okay, so nowadays whatever the computer systems or the handheld devices like mobiles we use, so all are multimedia devices. So you are able to, you can play the movies, you can play the videos, you can play the audio and so on. Okay, so all these things are possible through these multimedia systems. So these multimedia applications may also include the live webcast, the broadcasting over the World Wide Web of speeches or sporting events and even live webcams that allow the viewer in Manhattan to observe customers at the cafe. So the author has given an example that it is possible to have the live streaming of the activities that are carried out in Manhattan to be viewed in the cafe in a particular Paris. So this is about the multimedia system. So next we'll see the handheld systems. So as I already told you, handheld systems include the personal digital assistant, that is PDAs, such as Palm or Pocket PCs and cellular telephones as a special purpose embedded operating system. So I think the book is very old. So they has included only PDAs, but nowadays everybody knows the smartphones. Okay. So and again for the smartphone, the special purpose embedded operating systems will be there. Okay. So the best example is Android operating system. So the Android, they specifically for the smartphones, they have developed an operating system. It's an Android operating system. Okay. So what are the challenges that are faced for the handheld systems? So the most of the time we know that the handheld system, the size plays very important role. So they are very limited in size and they are battery operated. Okay, so size and power are the main constraints for the handheld system. So along with this, here they have listed some more. So the first challenge is the amount of physical memory typically is somewhere between the 512 KB to 128 MB. As a result, the operating system and applications must manage memory efficiently. So that's what the previous, as per his author's previous experience he has given. But nowadays, you know that the memory will be in terms of GB. So nowadays, your handheld devices, the smartphones will come with 16 GB, 32 GB internal memory also. So here, whatever the operating system and applications you install on that, so already you know that, so they will take the memory from internal memory only. So that's why the memory management plays very important role here. So the second challenge is the concern to developers of handheld devices is the speed of the processor used in the devices. So faster processors require more power. To include a faster processor in a handheld device would require a larger battery, which could take up more space and would have to be replaced more frequently. So that's what at the beginning itself I told you. So the size and battery plays a very important role. So whatever the processor that you use in the system, the handheld device, that also plays a very important role. So if you want to add a fast processor, so the fast processor requires a maximum the large amount of battery. So if you want to have large amount of battery, so it is not possible to with the regular batteries. So again there is a dependency. But today whatever the devices we are using, so they are having enough speed processors along with the battery backup. So a lot of things have changed now. So the third challenge is the I/O. Okay, so here the lack of physical space limits input methods to small keyboards, handwriting recognition, or small screen based keyboards. The small display screens limit output options, but today it is not there, because everywhere we have the touchscreen keyboards, so we get sufficient space in order to type the things and all. Okay, so this is about the handheld systems. So the next discussion is about the computing environments. So how exactly the computing environment is going to change. So first we'll discuss about the traditional computing environment. So in the traditional computing environment, traditional computing means whatever the computer systems we are using previously. So whatever the facilities or the services that the old computers were providing, so there is a gap between the old computer services and the new modern computer system. So that's what we say, that the line that separates the old computing system and then the new one is blurring over the time. So you consider the example of the office environment only. So in most of the time, the PC is connected to a network, terminals attached to the mainframe or the mini computers, providing batch and the time sharing. So now portals allowing network and remote systems access to the same software. Means here, previously in the office environment, what they used to do is, the office was having only the dumb terminals, only the display terminal were there, and the display terminals were accessing the resources or the services that are available on the mainframes or the mini computers. So they will be executing the task in terms of the batches. Okay, so this was previously available, but nowadays we have the web portals. So through web portals, it is possible to access the resources that are available on the servers or the mini computers, mainframes and all. Okay. So nowadays, again, if you consider the office system, they are not the dumb terminals or the display devices. The foolproof systems will be there. So whatever the minor tasks are there, so those tasks can be carried out on those particular machines itself. No need to access these remotely from the other remote devices. So you consider the home network also. So previously, whatever the systems you are using, so they were single system, and after that they started to use modems in order to have the interconnection with the internet. Okay, so after that they started to use the firewall in order to protect their system. Okay, and after that they evolved with the networks. Okay, so this is about the traditional computing. So after that, the next we'll discuss about the client server computing. So the client server computing, you know that here in the first traditional computing we discussed about the mainframe and mini computers. So to replace this, we had the concept of client server computing, where the mainframes are replaced by the servers and the display terminals or the dumb terminals are replaced with the clients. So here the dumb terminals are supplanted by the smart PCs. So instead of dumb terminals, the smart PCs are started to use. So many systems now servers are responding to the request generated by the clients. So the compute server provides an interface to the client to the request services, and file server provides interface to the clients to store and retrieve the files. So here in the figure you can see the client server architecture. One side we have the server and another side we have the number of so many clients. So all these clients will be accessing this server in order to accomplish their task. So the task may be through the computation power or it may be through the files. Here if they want to perform some task and that much amount of computation power is not available with them, so they will be accessing the server to accomplish their task. You consider the best example as the web servers. So if you want to host your website, so most of the time you will not be having that server with you, but what you will be doing is you will be taking a space from the service provider. Okay, so that service provider will be having his own server. So here your website will be hosted, but whenever you want to access, so you can access on your devices through the network from his server. Okay, so this is the computation power. Similarly, we have file server. Okay, so nowadays whatever the devices you are using, so these are having the sufficient amount of memory. But previous days, when you want to have the larger database storage, so for that the servers were used, the database servers were there. So the clients were able to access the data that is present on the server remotely through the network. So this is about the client server computing. So after this, the next point is peer-to-peer computing. So the peer-to-peer computing means whatever the nodes that are there, so there is no any distinction as the client node and the server node. So every node is able to act as a client and act as a server. Okay, so instead of all nodes are considered as peers here, so many each act as a client server both. So in order to join a new network, in order to add a network to the particular P2P network, so first it should join. Okay, so in order to join there is a procedure. So it registers its service with the central lookup service on the network, or broadcast request for service and respond to the request for service via the discovery protocol. Again, some mechanism is used in order to attach a new node to the existing P2P network. The P2P, why this name came is peer-to-peer means, so all are at the equal levels. But in client server, we know that server is at the highest level and clients will be like slaves. So they will be just accessing the resources from that particular server. But in peer-to-peer, what happens? All are at equal level. So all have the capability to act as a server as well as to act as a client or both. Okay, so this is what here. So here we have some examples of the peer-to-peer also. We have the example as the Napster and GNutella. Okay, so after this, the next special purpose, the computing environment is the web-based computing. So today we know that everything is web-based. Okay, so the web has evolved a lot today. So whatever the PCs you use, so almost all the PCs are connected to the internet. Okay, so it is possible to access the different web technologies or websites through the devices. Okay, so that's what here the more devices are becoming network to allow the web access. Okay, so the new category of devices to manage the web traffic among similar servers, that is load balancers, are required, because in the college also you may see that when all the different users try to access or try to download the videos and all, the internet will get slow. So that's why again we have to use some load balancers also in order to balance the load of the server. Okay, so this was possible only because of the existence of this web-based computing, because when everybody starts using that particular service, so there should be again some means of having control over that. Okay, so the use of operating systems like Windows 95 client side have evolved into Linux and Windows XP, which can be clients and servers. So he's speaking of Windows 95 and XP, but now we have the systems of Windows 10. Okay. So again, these are nothing but the different advancements that taken place over the years in order to introduce the different concepts or the modern technologies that they presently in used. Okay. So with this, we completed the discussion of chapter 1, that is introduction to operating systems. So in the next video, we'll start the second chapter from the first module of the operating system. Thank you.